Hello and welcome to Shattering Stereotypes, where our intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. You see, there's never been a shortage of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models. So the intention here is to showcase and highlight men of color who are doing amazing things in the world. And joining me today is Mr. Dennis Winkler, and he is one of those men who is doing amazing and incredible things. So without further ado, let's welcome Dennis to the show. Hello, Dennis. How you doing this morning?
Greetings. I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Fantastic, man. Really glad you took the time to share some wisdom and knowledge with us today. So before we get into your work, I want to begin with a few icebreaker questions just to kind of break the ice. So first of all, tell us where you're from and just a little bit about your growing up experience.
Okay. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up in Baltimore. Could you say that question one more time again?
Yeah, just tell us where you're from and a little bit about growing up. What was your growing up?
So basically, I grew up here in Baltimore. My life, I grew up with my mother and father. I grew up in what some would call an African-centered household. I had 3 sisters. I'm the only boy. I did pretty well growing up. I didn't get into too much trouble, but I have experienced, some of what Baltimore has to dish.
Sure. So name a woman other than your mother who has inspired you to be the man that you are today.
A wife.
Your wife. Nice. And how about a man that you look up to other than your father?
Man, it's a few, so I don't know how to really.
I know there's lots.
And so, but I would say, other than my father, a man that should it be living, or it doesn't really matter?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, I would say, I'll just say this. I'll say someone living. A Baba here, who's a psychologist named Baba Henry Gertrude.
Okay. All right. Now, name a book that you love and tell me what you love about it.
What I love. Now, what I love or what was insightful. I mean, I so many books, right? So,
right.
A book that I love and what was so insightful about it. You know what? I like Dr. Joy DeGruy's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Hold up, let me back it up. I'm gonna give you a book that I really like. I like Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naim Akbar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you love movies, name a movie that you love.
Movie. Oh man, I don't even really look at movies, but a movie that I really like. So it's been a while, so I'll tell you one of the movies that really stick out to me still to this day is Lean on Me.
Okay, got it. So that's a classic. Now, what would a perfect day look like for Dennis Winkler? What would a perfect day look like?
Perfect day? I'm kind of like an optimist. I'm kind of like I live in it every day.
Okay. And so, waking up, what would you be doing?
So you want? So how would it look?
Yeah. What would it look like? What would you be doing on a perfect day for you?
I'm sitting here talking to you right now.
Okay. That's a perfect day for me too, man. I love doing interviews, man. I love chatting with great people. So
okay.
Good. Now you just touched on this a little bit, but there are a lot of people who are pretty pessimistic about the future. And then there's some who are optimistic about the future. So I personally lean way toward the optimistic side. So you mentioned it. So where do you fall on that spectrum?
Well, I did say I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist.
Okay.
I would say I'm an optimist realist. So somewhere not too optimistic that I've lost my mind, and not so gloomy that I lost my mind. Somewhere in the middle. I'm a middle guy.
There you go. Right in the center.
Yeah.
Now, if I gave you a magic wand, and with this wand, you could create anything your heart desires, what would your life look like 10 years from now?
What will my life look like 10 years from now?
Magic wand.
Because I'm a collective person. I'm always I have the extended I, my. So my life would look like the streets of Baltimore and all the other cities and suburbs and counties and small towns and country towns and whatever else, seeing Black people living harmonious. You know, learning to get back to some of the things that we have done, some of the traditions that we've done. But for 2019, of course, or 20 or 10 years from now, 2029, it would look like we're practicing traditional ways of life, collective ways of life, instead of this Eurocentric way that we found ourselves to be a part of.
All right. Good vision. Good vision. I like that. We got to bring that to reality. And that's why we're having this show, because we can bring that to reality. I really believe that. So good vision. Now I'd like you to introduce Dennis the professional. So tell the audience about what you do.
Oh man, that's a very difficult question, but particularly for why I'm on this show, I'm a psychotherapist. Well, I'll throw that in there. I'm also a spiritual leader at the Temple of New African Thought. So that's where I'm at now. That's where we do all our work.
Nice. So why did you choose to become a therapist?
Why did I? Because I chose to be a therapist because I'm me being a minister. I realized there was a lot of problems in our community, and that I wasn't prepared or equipped for to really deal with. But more than that, I already knew that I wanted to be a psychotherapist for a long time. Reading some of our great works, such as Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Joy DeGruy, Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Kobe Cambone, and so many others. Dr. Ray Hagen's, who was a mentor of mine at one time. So many of our scholars coming from that psychological lens, I realized that there was a need for the work, because much of it, when we talk about Black psychology, comes from a theoretical lens. And I realized that this generation and future generations need to really take that theory and apply it.
Okay. Now, you created a group for men called Brothers Helping Brothers. Tell us about it.
This group that we've created, it's a male group, and the intention is that that mental health is a stigma in the Black community. So the idea is, if we can create a safe space for brothers, and they know it that is being led by other brothers, that could possibly give brothers some light, or compel them to come out and participate in some of the needed things that we need in our community. And so what we kicked it off with is anger management. And the reason why is that there's so many brothers out here that really need anger management services, and they're going to court. They're being mandated to actually seek anger management, but they find it very difficult. Also domestic violence, and they still find it very difficult. And I think it's incumbent upon us as brothers who are in this field to really assist brothers in this way. Most of my clients, or I can't say most of my clients, but I can say a great number of my clients are brothers. But the situation is that their sister or their mother or their wife or their significant other calls me because they know the stigma. They know that their husband, brother, spouse, son doesn't want to come to counseling because he doesn't believe that it can do anything for him, and he believes that he can do it himself, and he should be able to do it himself. And if he's not able to do it himself, then somehow he's a failure. So with that being taken into account, we try to create a space that is welcoming to brothers. And we have brothers on our team that's been through almost any and everything, if not more than anybody who's walked through this door. So we try to make this place very welcoming.
Nice. Now, I believe the three most difficult words for any man to say is, I need help. So right now, what I want you to do is I want you to destigmatize that idea and let men who are watching this know, first and foremost, that it is a sign of strength to say, I need help, versus a sign of weakness. So speak to that real quickly.
Yes, I speak about that quite often. And it is a sign of strength that once we realize and also have the ability to ask another for assistance. And the reason why I agree with that statement is that many times it's our ego, some call it, that's getting in the way. And that ego is keeping us from looking at someone else as someone that can benefit or help me. I'm ashamed. I feel like I'm supposed to be able to do it by myself. I'm a failure if I ask for help. Those type of things. And the reality is, when we look at what humans are, mammals, and we look at humans need help. Traditional cultures, as I say, had no problem with asking for help. In fact, I think part of how we destigmatize this is to say, personally, I am obligated as a citizen of the community, or a citizen of the tribe, or a citizen of the collective to help you. So I say that it is my obligation. It is not me giving back. It is my obligation. Thus, when you thank me, I also thank you.
Nice.
Because we need you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, it's been said that at the core of all addictions is some unresolved emotional conflict. So at the core, there's something that occurs emotionally, I believe, that keeps us stuck. So what do you think about that statement, that unresolved emotional conflict is the core of most addictions?
I agree, and I'm going to say I like your style. I like your style. I like the way that you ask these questions. They make me think. So I totally agree with that. At one time in my life, I didn't really believe that. I as a person that heard that they're self-medicating, I had no idea what that meant. They said, "Oh, he's self-medicating." I had no idea what that meant until I really started counseling. And when I started counseling, I started realizing that people's minds, our minds, many times are so much conflict is going on inside. Let's say that. So much conflict is going on inside that I can't even keep my mind I can't focus. I can't stop those thoughts, those intrusive thoughts from coming in my mind. And if we're talking about trauma, I'm feeling hypervigilant all the time. If we're talking about trauma, I'm always hyper alert. I'm always in this defense mode, especially if something has triggered it. So that is kind of bad for the body and mind, and it's bad for the community. It's just a bad thing to be always having cortisone and all these other hormones going through your body when you can't go to sleep. You can't use the bathroom like you want to. You can't focus like you want to. You can't, you're snapping at your mate. You're snapping at your children. You're snapping at everybody, or a lot of people. You're perceiving, or what you call attributing things. What they call attribution bias, where you're looking at things and you miss your cue. Looking at cues are off. So you're jumping, and you feel like You always have to defend yourself. So if medicine in our community has been stigmatized, but getting high hasn't been so much stigmatized, I'm going to go get high.
Mm. So now you touched upon trauma, which is actually my next question. So I hear a lot of times, a lot of Black folks joking about, when I was a kid, I got beat and I'm just fine. I got a whooping, I got a beating with a switch, you know, but look at me, I'm okay. Look, I want to talk about
oh boy,
the impact of emotional or physical and just verbal abuse and how that actually impacts us as adults, because a lot of times we're completely unconscious that we have these wounds. And so we rationalize and intellectualize the trauma without being able to express it. So we have these defense mechanisms, I believe. So we joke about getting beat and all that. So talk about the impact that that trauma as children has on us as adults.
It's heavy. It's real. I talk to it a lot. I mean, I've talked to it until people really like got blue in the face, if you know, figuratively, because most people I deal with are darker hue. I am not a pro corporal punishment guy. I don't think that it works. I think that I know that it's traumatic. I know it doesn't work. And I often say this. I say, I'm in Baltimore. If I'm walking past a bus stop, I'm looking at 3 dudes on the corner, and he's saying, man, these little ends, they ain't getting no whippings. Man, it was our day, man. Now, keep in mind, they have a bottle, or they bipping, or snorting, whatever they doing. They just they smoking. They doing all this self-destructive type of things, and they've done everything that these children have done, if not more. But they saying, we got our ASSs whipped. It said just like that, you know, but they say the words. And I'm saying to myself, you really think that somehow that works for you? Now, that's a great number of our community who talk like this. And then there's people in the corporate suites, because, you know, I don't like to say just to keep it to the streets. I tell you, let's go to the suites. So when we go to the suites, we see that people are very anxious, anal, retentive. They're very, they don't feel like they can do enough. They're jumpy. And this is what trauma does. It has you hypervigilant. You have a hyper startle response. You have all these things happening, and there's problems no matter if you're in the suites or the streets. You just don't realize them. We just don't realize them. And we don't realize how verbal abuse, when you calling somebody, you little Nigger, you're just like your daddy, and you ain't no good, and you're a little mother effer, and you're a little this, how that really traumatized children, because I also counsel children. And they tell me that they don't want to live because of this. So their parent doesn't know this, but but sometimes I have to, if they tell me that they're considering, then I have to actually disclose this information. And then and it's difficult as a parent to believe or look at yourself and say, what am I doing that causes my child to want to take his or her life? And it's also difficult for us to get out of our illusion that our life was perfect, especially if we've been successful or somewhat successful, or, you know, it's difficult to get out of our minds that this thing has really worked. I'm not a proponent of corporal punishment. I don't think it's necessary.
Now, I have 3 grown children, 32, 35, and 38. And when I was raising my kids, I had an experience with my former wife in that she accused me of trying to be white because I didn't spank my kids.
Oh my God. Yeah.
He couldn't understand that. For me, you know, it's interesting how some people that experience trauma as a child repeat that trauma, but others go the complete opposite. Fortunately for me, I went the complete opposite. I made a commitment early that when I had kids, I was not going to treat my kids the way I was treated.
Yes.
So I read books. I went to seminars. I learned how to become a great father because that was important to me. But there's still this idea that being nurturing and caring to our children somehow says that we're not being Black. And I think we need to change that narrative and understand that it's not an ethnic issue, it's a human issue. How do we raise our children to be healthy and whole, emotionally and psychologically? So like yourself, I personally don't believe in corporal punishment in terms of physical abuse. So again, I think it's important for us to understand how that impacts our communities when we don't raise our children that way.
You know, when you say that, it reminds me of some of the parents that I've worked with, and how they thought that one style was going to assist them in getting the outcome that they wanted out of their child who was acting out, or the adolescent that was acting out. And many times part of the work is parents are putting their children or adolescents in therapy, but not realizing that, where did that come from? Why do they need to be in therapy? And I often tell people that healing is often counterintuitive, because intuitively we think that if my son takes my car, if I punch him in the face, that somehow that's going to benefit, he's going to learn, or she's going to learn to not do that again. But it happens again, and it happens again. And then your child starts to resent you. And now taking that car, there was a problem way before he or she started taking that car.
Right.
Now, I often say that, again, healing is counterintuitive. It's not always this gut instinct that we have to smack somebody or call them a little something. And we can't, and after a while, children realize that, okay, you're just hurting me. You don't like me. You're calling me all these names. You don't like me. I don't like what you're doing to me. I feel hurt. I feel abused. They might even have the language say, I feel abused. They just think that you're the enemy.
Right.
And then you come to counseling and you say he needs to listen. And the only answer you have, you know what he needs? You know what he needs? That's what they tell me. You know what he needs? He needs to get his ass whipped. And I say, no, that's not going to work.
Right.
That's not going to work. That is why he's doing what he's doing now. He's not scared of you. And I mean, again, I like to say healing is not counterintuitive a lot of times.
Yeah. And we're going to jump.
I mean, healing is counterintuitive. That's what I meant to say. Right. Healing is counterintuitive.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to jump into that. That's the second part of this dialogue, is the healing part, which is really important. But I want to talk about, recently Common the actor admitted that he had been sexually abused as a child. And we've heard stories of, R. Kelly and I don't think we talk about it enough, but there is an issue in our community of boys and men being sexually assaulted. And yet we rarely talk about the impact that has. Now, as a survivor of sexual assault as a child, I can empathize and understand where Common was coming from, because what he's trying to do is create a conversation in which we start talking about some of these issues.
Yeah.
So from your perspective as a professional, masculinity has been wrapped up to be, I think we live in what I call an antiquated paradigm of masculinity, in which as men, if we're sexually assaulted by a female, we think that's a badge of honor. It's like, what? But we don't realize the emotional impact that has on a child when they're violated So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of men discussing openly these types of events? Because like I said, there's this disconnect where we are so afraid, so ashamed to talk about that type of trauma. So can you speak to the issue of sexual abuse in our communities?
Okay. And you saying specifically as it relates to brothers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Uh, okay. So again, I agree with you. And I think many times people who have been abused sexually and other ways, we don't realize that it actually was abuse. Many of us, we don't even realize that it was abuse. It's sometimes we even suppress them, or they're repressed. Suppressed meaning you consciously did it. Repressed meaning your mind took over and it just did some things to protect you. Um, this so so for as it relates to men, we don't want to talk about these things, and we hold these things in, which creates, even if we repressed it or suppressed it, we don't even know why we're so angry.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why we're so upset. We don't know why we're so protective. We don't know why we're beating our children. We don't know. We don't. So it becomes maladaptive. Your behaviors become maladaptive unless we address it. If we don't address it, I'm not saying you got to go out here and talk to everybody about your trauma, because that
Right.
might cause more trauma.
Right.
So, but what I am saying is somehow we have to process it. And there's plenty of ways to process trauma without even having to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can talk about it, or you can deal with it in other ways. But the thing is, the first thing is realizing that this thing which you think was normal and what society says is normal for men, because how can you be raped as a man? In fact, there's question around that. A man can't be raped. But definitely, some of the symptoms I see is hypersexuality, drug abuse, erratic behavior, uh, uh, a lot of, yeah. So almost looking very borderline personality like. So yeah, I see a lot of things that happen sometimes, and some more severe for others, because everybody who goes through abuse or trauma does not have the same symptoms, or some might not even have any symptoms that you can see. Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so for the audience viewing this, I just want to touch on this just a little bit because, as I mentioned, when I was about 9, I had a female cousin
Uh-huh.
who raped me. And there was a time when I couldn't say that. I couldn't even say those words. There was
Uh-huh.
too much shame associated with it. So what I'm attempting to do is let men know that if you've experienced things like that, you can heal from it, but you've got to be willing to admit and address it. And you
Uh-huh.
have to be willing to want to change.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And it's difficult. It's extremely difficult. But again, I think if we don't talk about it, we can't heal it. We can't move through it. So that's why I'm talking about it today,
Uh-huh.
because it's not our fault when we go through those things as children. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to heal from it.
Right.
So that's why we're having this dialogue. I hope if as you're listening to this, if you feel triggered, if something comes up for you,
Uh-huh.
and there's a possibility that there's something that needs to be healed,
Uh-huh.
so rest assured that it is possible for you to heal. So
Uh-huh.
just know that. So we're talking about healing, and this is a perfect segue into the next segment. Talking about healing. So Dennis, how would you define healing? How would you define healing?
Wow, I've never even thought about defining healing.
So let me throw this out to you. Let me throw this out to you. This is just Michael Taylor's definition of healing.
Okay.
Healing is the letting go of all repressed negative energy and allowing ourselves to feel all of our feelings and be able to express those feelings authentically and honestly. How did that land for you?
It definitely lands well. And I'm thinking from a psychosocial, spiritual perspective. Yes. Yes. Yes, sir.
Because here's my belief. Everything is energy. And what happens is when we're traumatized, we aren't allowed to express that energy, that feeling that we were experiencing in that moment. So it's repressed, it's suppressed, it stays trapped in our bodies. When we do the healing work and allow ourselves to feel whatever that pain might be, that negative energy, and we release it, that's healing. It's a letting go of that repressed and suppressed energy. And so we can think about it in our heads, but it's not about our intellect. It's about our hearts. It's about being willing to let go, because it's been said that if you can feel it, you can heal it.
Okay.
But what we do too many times is we don't allow ourselves to feel it. For example, I didn't realize that I was in all this emotional pain until after I went through a divorce, bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a deep state of depression. I was homeless for 2 years living out of a car. And it wasn't until I gained the courage to go to therapy that I began addressing some of those wounds, that repressed energy that I'm talking about. And so through the courage of going to therapy and getting in touch with and releasing that energy, I became emotionally free. And so our goal, I believe, as human beings, is to be free of all that emotional negative energy that stays trapped in us if we don't release it.
Yes.
So one of the most powerful things that I've done is the work by a man named John Bradshaw, who unfortunately passed away. And I did a 3-day workshop called Healing Your Inner Child. And it was profound. It literally changed my life. It changed me because through his workshop, I was able to release years of pent up pain. And so in your process, in your groups, you create a safe space for men to get real and to heal. That's the intent, is to help them heal.
Yes, sir.
So what are some of the things you do with your men groups that supports them in healing? Because I noticed on your website, you talked a little bit about meditation, you talked a little bit about drumming, and all of these things help facilitate healing. So what are some of the things you do to help men process that energy?
Okay. So groups and also individual. So you named a few things, and drumming, meditation, expressing themselves, allow them to express themselves, really reprocessing, using techniques such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization, education, talking about the etiology of what their symptoms, the cause, where did it start? Talking about when we're talking about African American men or men of color, or specifically men of African American descent here in the United States, we definitely take it back to what Dr. Joy DeGruy speaks about, post-traumatic, what she's termed post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is a framework that lets us look at what we've experienced in today from a lens of what's happened to us for 246 years of slavery, Jim Crow following that, and all these other things that took place, all the way up until present day, all the lynchings from 100 years ago to lynchings that currently go on today, and how that really affects us, how poverty, how our conditions have affected us, and not necessarily from a perspective that we are the victim and we have to stay victims, but really understanding so that we can know how to maneuver in the society. And so some of the things that we're ashamed about, some of the things that we see going on, we'll denormalize, if it's such a thing. We'll stop normalizing what is pathological. We'll stop normalizing what is maladaptive. So that's a major piece that we utilize, which is different. We also use a trauma-informed model. We also treat people with a trauma-informed model. We don't, excuse me, we don't try to re-trigger the stuff that's going on inside of them. We're very cautious of that. So really, education is a big piece. One of the things I use specifically is more of a cognitive behavioral approach as well, is challenging thoughts, rewiring the way that we operate, seeing so that we can see through a different lens. So that's a major piece, a different lens, rewiring the neural pathways in your brain, forming new habits, meditation. All that meditation and drumming is about being present in the body, as you suggested, because we are disconnected from the body. So really getting back in tune with yourself, in tune with ourselves, and living in the present versus worrying about what happened yesterday all the time, being in a constant state of worry and what happened in the past, or depression of what happened in the past, or a conscious state of anxiety of what may happen to me tomorrow. Because what happens is when we've been traumatized, many times we have formed beliefs of the world, and we see the world from a different lens. So really helping people see that things aren't as you may want them to be, but they're definitely not as dark as you see them. Everybody's not your enemy. And because that's a major piece in our community, we believe, and for some very good reasons, we believe that we have to protect ourselves. So everybody becomes an enemy. And when everybody becomes an enemy, healing is not going to happen. So really rewiring the way that we see, challenging our thoughts and beliefs, because our beliefs our beliefs have been formed by trauma, in our entire existence is not trauma.
Right. Right. Now, I wrote a book a few years ago called The New Conversation with Men. And in this book, I talk about what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And the first illusion is that to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. And so when you take that idea, that illusion, when you put it in the context of being an African-American male, there are some reasons why we had to suppress and repress emotions, because it was our life depended on it. Couldn't express certain things in certain ways for fear of being killed. That's a reality. But let's come to present day. And as I think about this idea that, men get trapped in this illusion that we can't express how we feel. And what we do is we just sort of push it down. And here's a perfect example. Because, generally speaking, men are okay expressing anger.
Absolutely.
Men aren't comfortable expressing fear or sadness or even joy.
Absolutely.
So what we have to be willing to do is understand that emotions are just energy in motion, not good or bad. It's just how my belief system says our soul communicates with us. But I want to speak to this point that as men of color, especially, why it's important to be able to be in touch with all of how our feelings. So remember when Philando Castile got shot? You remember the guy that his girlfriend was? Okay. Watching that video literally broke my heart.
Mm.
For 3, even now, I'm getting emotional because I experienced so much sadness in watching that. And fortunately for me, I have a group of friends who we have a community, if you will, of support and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to call my brothers, man, and we got together, and I just needed to process that sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't let it go. Now, I'm an optimistic guy, just a happy-go-lucky. But that seeing that, and obviously we've seen several instances, but there was something about that just broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to process that with my friends to allow myself to move through it. I couldn't talk myself out of that feeling, that sadness that I experienced in watching that. And few of us as men have communities in which we can share and release that type of emotional pain and energy. And so my point is that as men of color, we must be willing to express and feel what's going on inside of us, because if we don't, it manifests in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So touch base on the ability, or shall I say the willingness, of men to come to your group knowing that it's a safe space for them to share openly and honestly, because that's how healing occurs. Because as I shared with my group, that sadness, and I just sort of just, and in this context, my friends are very supportive, and they don't try to fix me. They don't try to make me wrong or judge me. They just allow me to emote and to feel and to release it and to heal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you said a lot of wonderful things that are right and exact, consistent with research, even. So just going back into feelings, I absolutely agree with you. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke about this whole idea or what I've seen working with young men up all the way up into adult men, that at some point in time, angry is not even acceptable because I'm cool.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
cool. Nah, I'm angry. Nah, I ain't angry. Nah, no, I ain't angry. What you mean? I ain't angry. I mean, I actually have to do and even grown men or adult men have a problem with admitting anger because we don't know what anger is. We think that anger means I punch you in the face. And the way that we do anger management, we look at anger management is not, you don't need anger management only because you punch somebody in the face or you did something very aggressively from a physical standpoint. We also speak to those who demonstrate passive aggressive behaviors or those who are too passive. Because I mean, as you said, historically, it even served us to be passive. And we have brothers, a lot of brothers who are very passive, and not passive meaning soft, passive meaning that I don't address any conflict because I know that I'm going to blow up, or I just don't want any conflict because I grew up in a very chaotic situation. So I'm cool. So the first thing is expressing those feelings are very important. And so if you got to angry or anger, I applaud you. However, there's some places deeper than that. We talk about the iceberg, and we talk about just the tip of the iceberg. Anger is a secondary emotion, whereas that you have all these other thousands and thousands of emotions. I even use an app called, what is it, Universe of Emotions or something like that. And it's a very nice app, and you can track your emotions so you can grow your emotional intelligence. Now, it's important to express yourself. It's important to be able to express your emotion as a man or anybody in general, but as a man is because we've been robbed of that opportunity to express our emotions. that we learn to express our emotion, because what happens is if we don't learn what the emotion is, the emotions have us. We are controlled by the emotion rather than we controlling or managing the emotion. We are controlled by the emotion. And the number one is one of my mentors say is avoidance is one of our number one ways of coping in this society. And avoidance does not work. It does not help. It works for the right now, but it doesn't work for the long haul. It causes so many problems because we try to avoid these emotions. Once we learn how to, first of all, identify these emotions, once we label them, their feelings, and once we know what these emotions are, they say if you can name it, you can tame it. If you can name it, you can tame it. Thus, you know that I'm angry. Why is it important? It's important because if I'm already, let's say, I feel, let's say, disrespected at my job, and I come home. Now I'm going to project that on my wife. If I don't know why, I'm already upset. Because many times you might come home and your wife says something to you, this little snap, a little something, but now you take all of that other disrespect or feeling like you're a lack of, or whatever other feelings you have that's maybe started at work or started when you were driving, you felt like you feel like a loser, you feel whatever it is, and wherever it came from. If you don't know how to identify what it actually is that you're feeling, when you go home, you'll start displacing all these emotions in forms of aggression or avoidance or whatever way you do it. So it's very important that you also express that. And coming to a group like this, it is very powerful because you see that you're not the only one dealing with these things. Because many times when we having these feelings, we don't know how to identify them. We feel alone. We don't feel like anybody else is going through this. So we feel shame, and we don't know about shame. In fact, I was talking to a brother the other day, and I mean, in the group even, and they were saying, well, I felt irritated when I saw a guy who told me, hey, I see you got a nice little car, nice car right there. So he's like, oh yeah, I hate him. He's a clown. I mean, no, I'm irritated by him. He's a clown. He's a clown. I'm irritated by him. So I said, so what is the deeper emotion behind that? I'm irritated. That's all. Now, irritation is a synonym for anger. So what I'm saying is that you can't even go deeper than that. What I'm saying, what is it? Did you feel like he belittled you? Did you feel disrespected? Did you so no, he's too cool to be disrespected and too cool to be angry even. So, but I'm irritated. And he's like a mosquito. He can't even say I'm annoyed, but I'm just irritated. I'm just irritated. I'm a dude. I just get irritated. So it's important to really identify these things, or you will displace them, and then it will come up in other aspects of your life, and you'll also be running and avoiding and not dealing with things, and thus you'll be living in a state of trauma.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned being passive. For me, because of my earlier trauma, see, I was the Mr. Nice Guy. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't make a distinction between anger and rage. I thought, to get angry means I would go into this rage. So I just shut off the emotion of anger. I just completely shut it off. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, again, that was part of my healing process, recognizing that, first of all, anger is not bad.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I had it in my mind that anger was bad. Bad people got angry because that's all I experienced as a child.
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to replicate that.
Yes, sir.
So what I did was I had to relearn how to feel that energy of anger and be okay with it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And be okay with it. And that was really difficult because you're talking, I was in my 30s when I started this process. So relearning and healing, again, it's definitely doable. And as men, we just need to start talking about it. And we need to put ourselves in environments like this so that we can heal. So as we start to wind down, man, time flies when you're having fun. I want to now get to the other side of this, because what we as men need to understand is joy and happiness, love. Because ultimately, I believe the goal of healing is to help us create deep, intimate, loving, connected relationships, because relationships are the glue that hold our lives together. And if we don't do our healing work, that's not possible. So I just want to speak to, for example, we have this idea sometimes in the Black community that, as Black men, being married and being in an intimate relationship is somehow makes us weak, that, we're whooped. But I'll say, as a happily married man for the past 17 years, I love being married. I absolutely love my wife. I adore my wife. And I am fulfilled in my relationship with her as a result of my own healing. So I just want you to talk to the joy and the happiness on the other side of this healing stuff, because if we do our work, that's the reward.
Absolutely.
The reward is connection.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, that's what we're striving for. We're striving for connection, and most of us don't know how to get there. So to get there, we got to do our healing. So just talk a little bit about the joy and the happiness on the other side of healing.
Well, I'll tell you this. Can I kind of like take it back from the whole feeling piece into, okay. So feeling, as we spoke about earlier, the research has shown that you can't cut off sadness, the anger, feeling disrespect. You can't cut off all these other emotions that you think are negative and also feel joy. Once you numb yourself, you rob yourself of all experience, all emotion. A lot of us cut these things off. So I know you think it's going to work. Not you. But we think it's going to work by cutting off our sadness and all these other emotions, fears, whatever. It doesn't work that way. Once you numb yourself, it does not discriminate with emotions. So first of all, we have to learn to feel. Secondly, in order to have joy, happiness, pleasure, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable. There's hurt. I know there's hurt in the past. So what happens is when we had pain in the past, we cut off ourselves from people. We disconnect ourselves from people because we don't want to be re-traumatized or re-hurt. We have to learn to trust, as we started off earlier. If I can't trust, I will not experience happiness. If I can't trust, I will not experience joy. If I can't trust, I will avoid. I will disconnect. I will keep you at bay. I would do a lot of things. In fact, we're going over a book. We have a book discussion group as well, where we're going over relationships, and the book is called Attached, and it talks about this avoidant and anxious type of behaviors. But nonetheless, avoidance is a major problem. In order to have joy, you have to be vulnerable. You have to open up. You have to express your feelings, and there's no greater reward than really being vulnerable, because then you don't have to always watch your back all the time. You can trust people to watch your back for you. You can learn to love your children. You can learn to love your significant other. You can learn to experience these things, but you first have to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And vulnerability is not a bad word.
It's a great word. So I want to sum it up this way, though, for the men who are watching this. Emotions are neither good nor bad. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. Emotions are just energy in motion. And so we have to connect authentically with those emotions, those energies that move through us. So in summary, man, I just want to say thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. This is important conversations we must have in our community. And so I'm so honored and proud and privileged to have interviewed you. And I'm really looking forward to putting this out there so more men can find you. So I want you to tell men, how can they find you to learn more about your work and what you're doing?
Okay, they can find more about me. And I always also say I use the African Senate Collective. Me means we. We can first go to templeofnat.org. That's templeofnat.org. They can also go to helpingbrothers.org. I can be reached at 443-333-2970. And you can also find me at Dennis Asar Winkler on many platforms.
Fantastic. Well, my brother, it has been an absolute joy and pleasure to interview you. And I'm looking forward to amazing things from you, because that vision that you had of what 10 years moving ahead would look like, that's what we're working towards.
It was my pleasure.
Healing our community. So again, thank you, my man. It has been a pleasure. So this has been another episode of Shadow the Stereotypes. Understand that we as men of color have the ability, the capacity to do, to have, and to be anything we set our minds to. We'll see you next episode. Take care.